Curtiss P-40 fighter plane, with its shark-faced nose, is probably one of the most recognizable aircraft in aviation history. I'm Paul Max Moga, and I've flown some of the most sophisticated planes ever built. It's legends like this that first piqued my interest in flying. I'm here at the Military Aviation Museum in Virginia Beach, Virginia, home to one of the largest private collections of restored warplanes in the world. On this episode of Great Planes, we'll learn the incredible history of the Curtiss P-40.
My name is Walter Ulrich. I served in the U.S. Navy as a fighter and attack pilot. During my career, I have flown many different aircraft, upwards of maybe 70 different makes and models of jet aircraft and propeller-driven fighters.
Walt, I gotta tell you, sir, this is an absolute privilege to be with this P-40 today. What can you tell me about where this specific plane came from, as far as where the museum got it?
It has a very interesting history. The airplane was lend-leased to Russia. It was shot down by the Germans near Murmansk, and it laid there for many, many years. It was finally discovered, and it was restored to flyable condition. It's a great flying airplane. It's a brilliant piece of history.
A piece of history that begins with Orville and Wilbur Wright. In 1903, the Wright brothers fly the first powered aircraft. They convinced the world that airplanes are reliable and can carry passengers. European leaders soon adopt the Wright flyers for military use, carrying supplies, reconnaissance, and drafting maps of enemy territory. Glenn Curtiss soon becomes the first American after the Wright brothers to build and fly an airplane. That same year, he demonstrates that his aircraft can compete with the Wrights by flying a full mile. At the Great Rhymes Air Meet, Glenn Curtiss flies faster than anybody has ever flown before, by reaching 47 miles per hour. Curtiss now has the interest of military leaders all over the world. The stage is set, and a new technology race begins as aviation pioneers, pilots, engineers, and mechanics work to improve engine power, stability, and speed. The U.S. Congress makes its first appropriation to purchase aircraft for training and tests. At the beginning of World War I, reconnaissance pilots from opposing armies begin shooting at each other from their cockpits. In 1915, a French pilot mounts machine guns and primitive armor on his plane. He and his plane are captured by the Germans, who used the idea and dominate the skies until mid-1916. During the golden age of aviation between the world wars, airplanes evolved from low-powered biplanes made of wood and fabric to sleek, high-powered monoplanes made of aluminum. Just before the Second World War, Italy shocks the world when it invades Ethiopia without provocation. The attack is an effort to heighten Italy's presence in the world and settle an old score from 1896, when Ethiopia fought off Italy's attempt to colonize. The Italians' use of aircraft sets yet another new standard for air combat. By dropping explosives, modern aircraft can be used for offensive operations. American aviation pioneers scramble to keep up. The Curtiss Company must design a modern fighter, capable of outperforming other European and American models. Their most successful attempt is the P-36A. Features like the multi-spar wing, sliding cockpit canopy, variable pitch Hamilton standard propeller, hydraulic split flaps, landing gear that retracts into the wing, and an R1670 radial engine makes the P-36 a leader in aviation. The U.S. Army buys them, and the $4.8 million contract is the largest for fighter planes in history. $4.8 million in 1936 is equivalent to roughly $27 million today. In 1935, Italy's aggression stuns the world when it invades Ethiopia. The Italian Air Force drops bombs, poison gas from planes, and demonstrates that offensive attacks from the sky can change the face of aviation forever. American plane manufacturers like the Curtiss Company scramble to compete on the global level. But their first attempt, the P-36, soon falls short to the German Messerschmitt Bf-109 and British Spitfire. The Messerschmitt Bf-109 is the pride of the German Luftwaffe. This compact, low-wing monoplane embodied all of the new technology of the day. Its light, streamlined shape is powered by a 12-cylinder inline engine, capable of speeds of 385 miles per hour at 23,000 feet. Two machine guns and a 20mm cannon that fires through the propeller make this airframe a force to be reckoned with. And Britain's Spitfire is no toy. Capable of speeds up to 362 miles per hour, she packs a deadly punch with 8 Browning 303 machine guns mounted in her wings. But the American competitive spirit won't allow the Germans and the British to set the standards for modern aircraft for long. A string of new U.S. fighters debut on the market. Lockheed debuts its P-38 with radically configured twin tail booms. Soon after, the Bell P-39 joins the ranks. Its liquid-cooled engine is located behind the cockpit, with the drive shaft passing to the left side of the pilot. The new design leaves room in the nose for a wheel to retract, enabling the P-39 to be equipped with tricycle landing gear, which makes it more stable during landings and less vulnerable to crosswinds. This heavily armed machine comes equipped with a 37mm cannon that fires through the propeller hub, and 4 machine guns synchronized to shoot through the propeller arc. Battle armor and a self-sealing fuel tank make it ripe for frontline use. The Curtiss Company is already developing what will become the P-40 by installing an integral supercharged liquid-cooled Allison engine in one of its older models.
Tell me about the engine. What kind of motor did it have in it?
Well, this is an Allison V1710 engine. It's around 1,200 horsepower. The horsepower varied a little bit for different models of airplanes, but it's a beautiful engine. The Allison runs smooth, it's easy to start, and it's dependable.
The United States Army Air Corps designates the new fighter the XP-40. It's equipped with 2 machine guns located in the upper fuselage deck, synchronized to fire through the propeller's arc. Wing racks for 6 20-pound bombs and a small air cooler beneath the nose round out the aircraft.
Early P-40s were not as well armed as this baby here. They had 250 calibers in the nose in the early P-40s and 30 caliber guns in the wing. 30 caliber guns would not do the job. So when they redesigned the P-40 later, they put 650s in the wing, which was really devastating firepower. It was one of the first airplanes that would go at least 300 miles an hour. If you loaded up with bombs, weapons, belly tanks, all that sort of thing, it of course decreased the speed.
The P-40 is developed to assist in ground support operations.
The airplane does not have a supercharger. The climb rate falls off above 15,000 feet. And this is one of the things that hampered the airplane during the war.
Not a whole lot of thrust or power to get up at the higher altitudes.
No, it could do it, but it did it not very well.
Yeah, so it's mostly a low altitude fighter.
Oh, yes, yes.
Now, was it a primary air-to-air platform, or did it have an air-to-ground role?
No, when it was designed as an air superiority fighter, an interceptor. In other words, to protect America back in the days before World War II.
Its range and speed makes it competitive with European models. The timing of the P-40's development proves prophetic when Adolf Hitler invades Poland in the fall of 1939. The world is shocked by the awesome military power of the Third Reich, and in particular, the German Luftwaffe, with over 4,000 all-metal aircraft. The formation of the Luftwaffe was a blatant violation of Germany's military restrictions, set forth in the Treaty of Versailles.
In 1939, the world is shocked when Hitler invades Poland, and the might of the German Luftwaffe is unleashed in Europe.
France and Britain declare war on Germany, so there is an urgent need for aircraft to counter the Luftwaffe. That same year, the Japanese continued to break the back of Chinese resistance by sustained bombings of every major population center in China. Foreign military officers around the world start to take notice of the Curtiss P-40, and international orders pour in. By May of 1940, the French government orders 140 units. To keep up with changing advancements in warfare and technology, and to prepare it for frontline combat, the Curtiss Company modifies certain features of the P-40. The new models have more readily available engines and are less powerful, but are equipped with more armor, bulletproof windshields, and leak-proof fuel tanks. 650 caliber machine guns give them respectable firepower. P-40s are sent all around the world. When Britain's Royal Air Force gets their first shipment, they insist that Curtiss replace the engines with the Rolls-Royce Merlins that are better suited for high-altitude flying. The Merlin is a liquid-cooled 27-liter, 60-degree V12 piston aircraft engine, considered to be one of the finest piston engines ever built. The maintainability of the Merlin engine is also greatly improved by allowing use of interchangeable parts rather than custom-made ones. But the P-40 doesn't have adequate performance for use in Northwest Europe against the Nazis' Messerschmitt Bf-109s. So the Royal Air Force uses them to combat Axis powers in various areas during the North Africa campaign. Campaign included operations in Libya, Egypt, Morocco, and Tunisia. After the fall of Paris to the Germans in 1940, Japan continues expanding into China. Systematically, Japanese troops capture cities across the country. Japan's invasion of China is a calculated effort to keep its war machine going by securing bases and raw materials needed to keep Japan economically sound and self-sufficient. The Japanese soldiers are better supplied with modern weapons and logistical support than their Chinese counterparts. And with continuous attacks on Chinese peasants, they can capture the rice crop to feed their own people and troops. China's leader Chiang Kai-shek seeks ways to halt the Japanese aggression. Enter General Claire Chennault, a retired Army captain and air advisor to Chiang Kai-shek in China's war against Japan. He persuades the Generalissimo and the U.S. government that a force of modern fighters and bombers can defeat Japan at their own game. On November 30th, the U.S. government grants $100 million credit to the Chinese, and P-40s are sent to China.
They had a tough time getting airplanes at first. Finally, the British gave up 100 P-40s that were supposed to be shipped to Britain, and they shipped them to China.
The situation in China is critical, and Chennault knows the missions will be challenging, and that he needs the best pilots available. He gets permission to recruit in the United States, realizing that the U.S. will be getting into the war sooner or later. Nicknamed Flying Tigers, the first American volunteer group is born. Some of the best pilots from the U.S. Army Air Corps, naval, and marine air services join its legendary ranks. They are permitted to resign their commission temporarily, with the understanding that at some point they can be recommissioned and sent to war. Usually, when a U.S. citizen fights for another country, they lose their citizenship. But the Flying Tigers are allowed to keep their citizenship and seniority should they decide to go back into their own service. Many joined for a better salary and the chance to get in a shooting war, which many of them were eager to do. During the summer of 1941, 100 pilots and 200 crewmen are recruited. The pilots receive 72 hours of specialized air combat lessons in a teak wood shack in Taungoo, Burma, by General Chennault himself. Captured Japanese flying and staff manuals serve as textbooks. 60 hours of flying and an Asian geography lesson round out the training. The American pilots learn more about Japanese tactics than any single Japanese pilot. The AVG P-40s are assembled at Rangoon, and all radios, oxygen equipment, and armament are installed by AVG group mechanics at Taungoo. But the planes are assembled under primitive circumstances and tested without having all the manuals.
You notice the landing gear struts on this airplane, it's built like a tank. It's very, very strong.
I would assume because it was meant to take off and land on unimproved surfaces, you know. Well, I guess when they operate out of China, they didn't have a whole lot of runways.
No, they all had dirt runways. And boy, I'll tell you, it was built for rough use. It did its job.
Yeah.
For its day, this was quite an airplane.
The circumstances don't dampen the patriotism and drive of the Flying Tigers. They are ready for action. On December 7, 1941, reports of the Japanese assault on Pearl Harbor are radioed around the world.
We'll analyze now these latest developments. Upon Pearl Harbor naturally would mean war.
The news is stunning, and now everyone knows the United States will enter the war. The news strengthens the Flying Tigers' resolve, opening the door to heroism. The Chinese government offers a $500 bonus to any pilot for every Japanese plane shot down in air combat.
In the wake of the attacks on Pearl Harbor, the AVG Flying Tigers gear up for an assault on Japanese fighters over Southwest Asia. Lieutenant General Claire Chennault splits the men into 3 squadrons: Adam and Eve, Panda Bears, and the Hells Angels.
The Hells Angels squadron moves to Rangoon on December 12, 1941, to join the RAF in defense of Rangoon. The 1st and 2nd squadrons fly to Kunming on the afternoon of the 18th. The first combat occurs over southern Yunnan province on December 20th, 1941. A combination of the 1st and 2nd squadrons shoot down 9 out of 10 Japanese bombers, with a loss of 1 AVG aircraft. The 2nd engagement brings the 3rd Squadron into action over Rangoon on December 23rd.
a total of 6 Japanese bombers and 4 fighters are lost. The AVG loses 4 planes and 2 pilots. Their biggest victory comes on Christmas Day, when 2 waves of Japanese bombers and fighters hit Rangoon. The AVG shoots down 23 Japanese planes without a single loss. Battles rage into the new year. The Japanese lose 42 aircraft compared to the Flying Tiger's single casualty. In the 11 days of fighting, the AVGs claim 75 enemy aircraft and lose only 2 pilots and 6 aircraft. The attacks have a deep impact on the Japanese bomber formations, which since 1931 have been unopposed.
It picks up speed in a dive. Now, this is one of the things that I always read about, and I tried it here. And we were flying with a Corsair one day, and I put the nose down, didn't touch anything, and it just walks away from other airplanes. So I can see why the Flying Tigers love this airplane, because if you get into trouble, you could dive away. One thing it could do is outdive the Japanese Zero. You could use that as a good escape maneuver. And they were able to intercept the Japanese bombers. They really surprised the Japanese. They had no idea that they were there when they first started. They did a wonderful job. It was one of those great things in aviation history.
The more missions the Flying Tigers fly, the more they learn how to push their P-40s to the limits.
Hello, I'm Andrew Michaelak. I'm a retired fighter pilot for Air National Guard of the state of Maryland and New York. And I've flown fighters since I was 22 years old. Any airplane properly flown against an opponent can come out on top if you knew what you were doing, which is what Claire Chennault taught the American Volunteer Group pilots over in China. That's how they had such a great record against the Japanese, who had much more maneuverable airplanes. It was a nice flying airplane. It was a great machine that had 650 caliber machine guns, plenty of firepower for air-to-air and air-to-ground work, and relatively easy on the maintenance, which I'm sure was a big factor out in the field. At some point when they started flying these P-40s, somebody saw a picture of an airplane with the shark's teeth and eyes painted on it and looked pretty good. So one of the Flying Tigers came up with a drawing and asked Colonel Chennault at the time if this would be a good scheme for the fighters in his airplane. He said it would look good on all of them. So eventually all the airplanes were painted with this shark's teeth and eyes, and each one was a little bit different.
That shark mouth on that airplane was designed to be seen a long way away. If the squadron was real gung-ho and they had top aces had been in the squadron, it was meant to shake up the opposition, you know, when they went and attacked the Italians in the desert especially. Shark mouths showed up, so enemy is supposed to tense up, you know.
The AVG asked the Disney Studios in California for a unique cartoon symbol to adorn their planes, and were provided with a winged tiger leaping through the air.
A flying tiger, huh?
The Flying Tigers wore an AVG bloodshed on the back of their jackets. It was a message to the Chinese that they were American airmen fighting the Japanese. They had met misfortune and needed assistance in returning to their home base. During the 6 weeks the Flying Tigers spend defending Rangoon, they have 31 encounters with the Japanese. The AVG destroys 217 Japanese planes and loses only 6 pilots and 16 aircraft. Though the Flying Tigers continue to outgun their enemy, the Japanese have an endless supply of planes and pilots. The Burma Road can no longer be held. And on March 7th, Rangoon falls to the Japanese. The Flying Tigers shift strategies and begin successfully attacking Japanese air bases. But the career of the American Volunteer Group is short-lived. In late April, Claire Chennault is reinstated into the U.S. military and becomes a brigadier general in the U.S. Army Air Corps. The AVG is disbanded on July 4th. The group commemorates its final day in the air by shooting down 5 enemy fighters over Hanyang and escorting Army Air Corps B-25s to bomb the Japanese air base at Canton. Flying Tigers are absorbed into the 23rd Fighter Group and continue defending China against the Japanese Air Force.
Well, this airplane served really very well in China after Flying Tigers, and during that time they had great success against the Japanese fighters in China. So the Army Air Corps then took over the Flying Tigers job and continued to use the P-40, known as a Warhawk, this particular model is known as a Kitty Hawk, throughout the remainder of World War II in China.
But the Japanese war machine seems unstoppable. Japanese factory output of aircraft continues at an unprecedented level. Though planes are being destroyed by the Allies, the Japanese are able to supply their air force with the machines needed to conduct their Asian expansion. China continues to be a major challenge for Japan. And now, with the formal help of the United States Army Air Corps, more and more American pilots and planes defend its skies. Pilots are trained to stay in pairs, attack in a dive, fire, climb out, and repeat the maneuver again.
What was the performance like of the P-40 in a dive? I heard this thing could do some good
when
work.
the airplane is clean, it could dive quite well, and this is what it was noted for. However, you had to almost stand on the left rudder to keep it straight. It's a close-coupled airplane. The ball goes out of the center, and you really have to hold left rudder when you start picking up a lot of speed. But the best part was that the Japanese, if they were following you, they simply could not. If you were chasing a Japanese Zero, they could only recover one direction. And here you were, you knew which direction he was going, and you could get him.
And pop it.
Yep.
P-40s continue to inflict severe damage to the Japanese air fleet, leaving the Japanese frustrated with their lack of progress.
As the war progressed, of course, a lot of the other aircraft had superchargers, and this aircraft began to be used as a dive bomber and all-around airplane.
Yeah, so they actually could put bombs on it if they wanted
Oh, yes,
to.
they could. They used to rig a 500-pound bomb right under where the drop tank is. Even in the later versions of the airplane, they put bomb racks under the wings, too.
But problems for the P-40 emerge. The scarcity of the Merlin engines forced the decision to put the less desirable Allison engines back into the aircraft. But the P-40's glory days aren't over. The famous airframe is inherited by the Tuskegee Airmen. Named after the Tuskegee Army Airfield in Tuskegee, Alabama, where they train, the first black airmen become single-engine and multi-engine pilots. From 1941 through 1946, 994 pilots graduate at Tuskegee Army Airfield, receiving commissions and pilot wings. .450 of the pilots serve overseas, in the 99th Pursuit Squadron and the 332nd Fighter Group. The 99th Fighter Squadron trains in and flies P-40.Warhawk aircraft in combat in North Africa, Sicily, and Italy from April 1943 to July 1944.
They had quite a brilliant career. Their claim to fame is that they escorted bombers from Italy. It was the 15th Air Force. During the Italian campaign, they performed brilliantly. I do know that some were aces.
The Curtiss Company can't keep up with modern demand.
For some reason or other, the Curtiss Company never did supercharge the airplane. When the P-51 came out, they did have superchargers in there. Once they got the superchargers in the P-51, the P-40 just faded in the background. And they were used then mostly for air-to-ground stuff. They could no longer be an air superiority fighter.
And while the scrappy P-40 has always somehow held its own, it can no longer compete with more modern designs like the P-51 Mustang.
The P-40 was an older technology. It did not have enough power to go chase the Messerschmitts. The P-40 was hampered by an engine that did not have a supercharger. The early Allisons were not able to be supercharged. As such, their service ceiling was low. That was the big drawback to the P-40.
The Mustang emerges as a true champion fighter aircraft, capable of fast speeds at high altitudes. The P-51 Mustang is one of aviation history's elite aircraft. It has a kill ratio of 11-to-1, making it one of the highest scoring fighters of the war. The aerial victories account for almost half the total claimed by all American units during the war after the arrival of the P-51.
When the Mustang came along, the P-40 began to fade in the background, but it's interesting to know that the Curtiss plant kept them in production, even though they were obsolete. They kept them in production until early 1944.
The last Curtiss P-40 leaves the assembly line on November 30th. Over 13,000 served their country with honor.
It was there when we needed it. The airplane, I think, did an admirable job in the Pacific, in the Far East, in Africa. It was all they had, and the Russians welcomed them.
In a ring of fierce fighter competition, P-40's technology proves no match for its competitors. Yet the evidence overwhelmingly suggests the P-40 served its pilots well. Flying Tigers, Tuskegee Airmen, and 28 Allied countries around the world owe their lives to this unstoppable aircraft.